Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Cinemaholics. I am not your usual host, John Negroni, but rather from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm your usual co-host, Will Ashton, a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and then I also obviously write for cinemaholics.com. But joining me, as per usual, is our good friend from Kansas City, the film editor from The Pitch, with bylines from Slash Film, Crooked Marquee, RogerEbert.com, and etc. It's Abby Olchesi. Hey, Abby.
Hi. Hello.
It's a little weird because I'm not used to host this show, let alone just being the two of us, but we'll hopefully make it through.
I bet we will.
Yeah, unfortunately, John, last minute found some fairly unfortunate news, so he's unable to join us this week, but we were talking before, hopefully he'll be able to join us next week, because I know he was really excited to talk about our main review, which will be Run, which is the sophomore film from, you know how to pronounce the filmmaker's name? I forgot to look up beforehand. I feel bad, but
I can't get his last name right for the life of me. Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
Aneesh Chaganty is the director of that one. Yeah.
This is the sophomore film for him for Searching, which came out, I believe, 2017 or 2018. And then this is his long-awaited second film, but unfortunately, John, even though he was a big fan of Searching, I know he really wanted to talk about this film, but unfortunately he's not here. But I'm sure next week, if he's around, he'll be able to fill us in on what he thought about the film. But before we get into that, you can find more episodes of the show on our full archive on cinemaholics.com, including our written reviews. And you can also write into the show anytime by emailing us at cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. And you can support us directly by becoming one of our monthly patrons at patreon.com/cinemaholics. All right, so just before we get into the main show, we have a extra milestone to plug. Sam Nolan, once again, he was joined by two guests this time. It's a little weird because usually he has one guest on to talk about whatever films that he decides to talk about on the show. But this time he talked about All About Eve and Rebel Without a Cause, which are two films. I don't know. I've been meaning to see both of them for a long time. I'm assuming, Abby, you're much more caught up on these two films than I am.
I actually am not, unfortunately. They're both on my to-watch list, so I'm curious to watch those and then listen to what Sam and his guests had to say about them.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen clips from Rebel Without a Cause. I know I've seen like the car chase scene and like a few other scenes from the film, but for whatever reason, I haven't seen the whole thing all the way through. But if you have seen the films, or if you haven't, I mean, I'm sure Sam is very mindful of spoilers. You can check that out. The first half of the episode, talking about All About Eve, he is joined by his guest, Robert Wilkinson. And then for the second half, he is joined by Anthony Bagdello, who is his previous co-host on his first podcast with us, which was called Anyway, That's All I Got. Which I don't know if you ever got a chance to listen to that, but I definitely enjoyed that one as well, in addition to Extra Milestone. But unfortunately, that is no longer around. But thankfully, we still have Extra Milestone, which is always a delight. And once I finally get a chance, like you, to watch All About Eve and Rebel Without a Cause, I'll definitely make a point to listen to what John and friends Sam and friends have to say about the film. But Abby, before we get into the main reviews, you had two off topics that you were going to discuss. One was a miniseries that you have watched all but the last episode, I believe you said, called The Good Lord Bird. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
For sure. So The Good Lord Bird aired or started airing earlier this fall on Showtime. And it is an adaptation of a James McBride novel about the Bleeding Kansas era and about John Brown. So I myself am from Lawrence, Kansas originally. And so John Brown, who was an abolitionist and kind of in the domestic terrorist guerrilla fighter vein, he's a figure who looms large in Kansas history and looms large in the hearts of Lawrencians, particularly because he spent a lot of time around that area of the state. So it's a fictionalized story about a young boy named Onion who comes into the army sort of John Brown. But John Brown mistakes Onion for a girl and dresses him in women's clothing for the entirety of the series. They have kind of a odd relationship. Onion is both impressed by John Brown and kind of loyal to him for being kind to him, but also has kind of this odd relationship with the fact that he's living under an assumed identity because he's afraid to be honest about John Brown having made a mistake about him. But it's I think it's really funny. Ethan Hawke plays John Brown, and he is just extremely likable and funny in that role. Daveed Diggs is also pretty prominent in the series. He plays Frederick Douglass, and his portrayal of Douglass is really interesting as well. It's a little different than kind of the traditional take that we usually get on historical figures like that. So yeah, in general, it's a really enjoyable series. I think it's also really dramatic, and it's acted really well. I think Ethan Hawke was part of the producing and show running team putting this together, so he's really invested in it, and you can tell because of his performance and also the performances of the folks around that central performance. It's a lot of fun. I liked it a lot, and whether or not you are a fan of Kansas history, of abolition history, I think there's a lot to enjoy there.
Nice. Did you say what station I was on?
Yeah, it's on Showtime.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm always down for a Western. I know definitely when you and John were talking about the Queen's Gambit, I was thinking like, man, I got to get around to watching Godless too. That was on Netflix, the show that Scott Frank made before this. But yeah, I've been seeing some word of mouth about the show. Unfortunately, I haven't seen too many advertisements from it, but I definitely see every time I see something about it, I'm like, man, I got to get on this because I love seeing like Westerns like this, very character driven, but also kind of drawn out through the miniseries format. So that's a very fun recommendation for me, I say. And then you got a Fellini set, I believe you said?
I did, yeah. So yeah. Criterion this month is putting out a giant box set celebrating the work of Federico Fellini, the Italian the Italian New Wave director. Sorry. And he's like famous for movies like Juliet of the Spirits, La Dolce Vita, 8.5, a lot of films in general, but those are some of the biggest ones. And the box set that they have just put out is this like 14 film collection, and they're gorgeous. It's all like Blu-ray 4K restoration with loads of special features, and it comes with 2 separate books. One that's like a scholarly guide to the films and to Fellini's career, and the other that is just kind of a set of essays by filmmakers and writers, all of whom you definitely will have heard of, like folks like Bilge Ebiri, who wrote for The Village Voice and now does a lot of work for a variety of sites, including Vulture, and filmmakers like Kogonada, who made Columbus. So lots of cool thoughts from them on some of their favorite Fellini movies as well. Also, the box is gorgeous. So I wanted to plug that because Fellini's kind of a blind spot for me as well. I've seen a couple of his movies, but want to watch more. So the opportunity to grab a review copy of that set was pretty exciting. So I'm planning on using that to kind of fill a lot of my quarantine time between here and the end of maybe next year. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, as a gift, I think anybody that you would get this for would be pretty grateful because there's enough here to keep you busy for a very, very long time.
Yeah, it sounds like a great buy and definitely a great way to spend, like you said, quarantine time in these very uncertain times. Because like you, I've only really seen, I think, just 8.5 as far as my Fellini background is concerned. But if you are much more well-versed in Fellini and you get this box set, be sure to listen to our extra milestone episode where I believe Sam Nolan and John Negroni talked about La Dolce Vita, which is one of John Negroni's favorite films, and I believe certainly his favorite Fellini film. But yeah, like you, I definitely need to catch up on a lot of these, so I'll have to keep that in mind for maybe my own Christmas list. But it sounds like is it expensive or is it fairly reasonably priced?
It is. It's pretty expensive. I would say that it's worth it given the amount of content that's in there. But yeah, for sure, quality. And the quality as well. Like it's Criterion, so like it's everything that you would expect out of a Criterion release, like 14 times over. So yeah, it's a little bit up there, but I think just in terms of the amount of enjoyment that a person could get out of it, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I know they've done a couple box sets at the Criterion. I know last year, I believe around this time, they did the Godzilla collection, which is just the huge, like 50 plus years of Godzilla movies in one package, which is just an amazing deal as well. So obviously, we're big fans of the Criterion collection and everything they do to preserve a lot of these classic films, and even stuff like Godzilla movies, which not all of them are equal, obviously, but the fact they're willing to put them out in one big, beautiful package. Same with the Fellini collection is definitely an amazing thing that they're doing. But before we get into the main reviews, we also wanted to point out that we did get a lot of voicemails for the Ron Howard question that we posed last week, which was asking people what were their favorite Ron Howard films, as well as their least favorite Ron Howard films. But because John has access to those voicemails, we don't actually have a chance to play them this week. So I suppose if you missed the deadline last time and you wanted to answer, you can feel free to do so, but unfortunately we won't have a chance to play those, but we will hopefully get a chance to do so next week. So I am looking forward to hearing what people have to say. I don't know if we got the chance to talk about it. Abby,
I was about to ask that. Yeah, I was about to ask that of you as well. I wasn't sure if we'd actually gotten to answer that question ourselves.
Yeah
Favorite Ron Howard movie, I think I would go with Apollo 13. He's done several that I like quite a bit, but that might be the one that I like the most.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had watched it. I've watched it before, but I watched it again recently, like a couple of years ago. I think it was like the anniversary of the moon landing. And so I was kind of getting big on early space program movies for a little bit there. And I just was reminded of how really solid it is. And I like movies a lot that are about process and about figuring things out. And there's a lot of really good process in that movie, a lot of which I think comes from the screenwriter, who's also, I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he's also the filmmaker who made the documentary For All Mankind, which is like a really highly detailed film about the early days of the space program. So like all of the stuff that's in Apollo 13 feels very real and very human and connected because it's being told by somebody who actually gets it.
Nice. Yeah. The screenwriters are William Broyles Jr. and Al Reithert. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but
it's Al.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I think if I had to pick a favorite from Ron Howard as a director, that would probably be mine as well. Not only because I think it's his best film, but because it's probably his best, or I think, in my opinion, most well-directed film as well. So that's a pretty easy pick for me. I wish we have maybe a little bit more of a back and forth, but I do also really like Frost Nixon. I think that might be my second favorite from him, as well as Cinderella Man is another one I really like a lot. Just looking back on some of his more recent stuff, or I guess that's not really recent because those are both about I guess almost like 15 years old now. But I also really did enjoy Rush. I think that's the last one of his that I remember really being taken by, certainly from a directorial standpoint. But do you have a least favorite, since we also posed that question?
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned Rush, because that's one that I keep. I feel like I get reminded of it every once in a while as a thing that I should watch and haven't seen yet. So
I'll have to check that
out. Yeah. But I think at this point, Hillbilly Elegy is pretty low down there. Sorry, Ron Howard. That one's pretty rough. I'm not wild about Solo, but I'm not gonna put it all the way at the bottom. I feel like it's a fine movie. It's kind of middling. That's probably gonna get me some hate from some Star Wars folks, but there's kind of a current Twitter discussion going over whether Solo or Rogue One is the better movie. I think it's Rogue One for sure. But but in terms of Ron Howard stuff, I'm really not keen on Hillbilly Elegy. I feel like that's going to be, it already is a movie that has been getting some pretty negative reactions. I feel like that's going to be kind of a black mark for a while.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised, but just knowing that it's his most recent film and we have to say it's his worst doesn't really serve as a fitting tribute, I guess, to Ron Howard. But nevertheless, I don't know if it's my least favorite, but the one that I have, I guess, the strongest negative feelings for is How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is a film that, as a kid, I watched a lot, so I know it very, very well. But it's a film that I think, as an adaptation, it's terrible for several reasons. But
that one's pretty rough. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah, at the same time, I do have to commend Jim Carrey for committing wholly to the part, and the makeup work obviously is incredible.
Sure,
but I have a lot of feelings on that film. But we didn't mention The Paper, which is, I believe, another one of his films that's considered like one of his best.
It is. I love The Paper. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, Ron Howard has such a wide and varied career. Yeah, I think Paper would be up there with Apollo 13 as one that I really like a lot. That was I have some kind of personal feelings about that movie because that was one that our at my college newspaper in back in Pittsburgh, Kansas, when I first started college, our editor-in-chief, that was the movie that he liked to show to new recruits at the beginning of every year. So that's
nice.
Fond memories of The Paper.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in college, my guidance counselor was advising that I see it, but for whatever reason, I never got around to it, which I feel bad about. But in any case, he has a huge, like you said, very eclectic filmography filled with films that I guess don't really have a wide artistic stamp on them, but clearly show that when he is in the right vehicle, he can make something that's really commendable and sometimes quite good. But obviously, like you said, Hillbilly Elegy is not that type of film from what you've seen, and I guess I won't. I don't imagine my opinion, if I do get around to seeing it, will be much different. But alas, hopefully the next one is a little bit better for him. But
I have hope. I'm not going to condemn Ron Howard outright for one bad movie, but yeah.
I mean, like we said, like he's such a inconsistent filmmaker as far as like just making films of like not only different genres and scales, but also just making a just all over the map type of films as far as just quality. Like sometimes he'll come out with a great film, sometimes he'll make a film that's just like forgettable, like Inferno or like Da Vinci Code, and then he'll bounce back. I'm sure.
Yeah,
but
I have no doubt.
Yeah. But let's get into our main review. So like we said before, our main review is going to be the new film from, let me see if I got this right, Aneesh Chaganty.
Yeah.
This is his sophomore film called Run, which was initially going to be released in theaters through Lionsgate, but became a Hulu exclusive a little earlier this year when it became apparent that it wasn't going to have a wide or very prosperous theatrical run. So probably a smart move as far as just like making a film that is pretty much home based already, a streaming exclusive. But this is the one with Sarah Paulson and Kiera Allen. And I don't know if is this her debut? I didn't get a chance to see, but I know this is the first film of hers I've seen.
Yeah, I don't believe it's her debut, but it's for sure a breakout. I think this is it. Yeah, this would appear to be the biggest thing that she has been in to date. I think there's one other film that came out in 2014.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't see her in anything else as far as I could recall. But I mean, yeah, like you said, this is obviously her breakout role, and certainly the one that I think that will hopefully propel her career in a lot of good and beneficial ways. But it also stars Sarah Shawn and Pat Haley, who I didn't realize was in the film until I watched it. He gets a fun little cameo midway through.
He does, yeah.
Yeah. I'm always happy to see that guy. A very good Letterboxd follow, too, if you ever are looking for someone fun to follow Letterboxd. But Abby, tell us a little bit about the plot for this film and then what your general thoughts were.
Sure. So Run is about a mother and daughter. We'll start with that. It's a thriller about a mother and daughter. Sarah Paulson plays Diane. She's the mom. Kiera Allen is her daughter, Chloe. And Chloe has a lot of medical conditions that keep her confined to a wheelchair. She also has like a heart arrhythmia. She has asthma, just lots of conditions that keep her kind of medically compromised and fragile. And her mom, Diane, has been caring for her pretty much her entire life, and has had her fairly sheltered to the house. Like they appear to live in the country. They grow their own food. And Chloe is homeschooled. She's about 17. She's getting ready to go to college, which is kind of the fulcrum for how things go the way they go. So Diane is teaching her from home, and she's taught her a lot about STEM. She's very smart in like engineering and mathematics, especially. And she appears to be supportive of her daughter going to college. There's kind of the sense that maybe not all is as it appears. So Chloe discovers one day while going through the groceries a bottle of meds that her mom has brought home, presumably for Chloe for one of her conditions. But it has her mom's name on the label, and she's not sure what it is. And so her doubt regarding that revelation kind of becomes this giant tailspin of how much of her relationship is with her mom is built on a lie. How sick is Chloe really, and how can she kind of escape her mom's overbearing care of her and start living the life that she believes is hers to live. So it kind of becomes a I wouldn't say that it's exactly like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but like some similarities in terms of
Yeah.
like the setting, like the closed house, being dependent on a caretaker.
Right.
Some similar obstacles are involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you brought up that film because I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking of Mommy Dearest, which doesn't have Joan Crawford, but obviously Faye Dunaway is playing Joan Crawford in that film, and it's kind of a similar vibe to that as well. But yeah, I mean, definitely like Misery was another film I heard this compared to. What was there's something else I'm blanking on what it is right now, but yeah, I mean, there's films of this similar vein, but it's also like I don't want to make it seem like it's like a retread of those films, even though you can make some kind of simple comparisons to that, but. Right. In any case, yeah. What were your thoughts on the film itself?
Yeah, it's I think as the premise of the movie unfolds, which I feel like is from the opening moments fairly easy to cotton onto. At least I've figured out more or less. I had it kind of figured out what would likely happen. And I thought at one particular point that maybe I was wrong, but no, like it fits almost exactly what you think it's going to be from the opening moments, which is an interesting take on its particular subject matter. I wouldn't say that it's without some issues. Overall, I really like the movie. There are some third act revelations that don't quite work, that feel a little bit sloppy toward the execution at the end. But I think there's a lot thematically that's interesting. There are some things that kind of made me feel a little less than great, but I don't think they tip into like outright problematic territory. Overall, I think it's pretty empowering in terms of being a film about a person with disabilities, and particularly in the case of Kiera Allen, who is wheelchair bound in real life and puts in an amazingly physical performance as Chloe, and does some incredible stuff that just I think shows off the character's mental capacity and determination, and unwillingness to be a victim, which is great and something that doesn't always happen in portrayals of people who are differently abled.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like our opinion on the film is going to be pretty similar in that. Yeah, I mean, I think even though Sarah Paulson's like the person who's on the cover and the poster, I mean, and like being shown throughout the promotion works, this is Kiera Allen's movie through and through. Not only because she's the main character, but in my opinion, I think she even outshines Sarah Paulson, which is not an easy thing to do because obviously we've seen a lot of great work from Sarah Paulson. She's kind of playing into this part in a very, very fun and kind of toothy way. But yeah, as you were mentioning, this is, I believe, from what I read, the first major thriller to star a person who is in a wheelchair in 70 years, which is, no small accomplishment, even though this is a fairly contained film. And definitely you can tell that that perspective is something that makes it very humane, something that brings what's a kind of familiar premise into, it gives it a little bit more of a fresh and intriguing perspective in a way that you can feel the frustration and the like temptation of the main character, and you get her point of view in a way that, like you said, it doesn't feel like it's exploitive or that it is like a gimmick or any sort of way. It's like actually trying to do something very good and very humane as far as giving a genre film to a person who like let me figure out the best way to phrase this. A disability that hasn't really been portrayed too well in film or portrayed too well from a main character perspective. And so obviously that's very humane and definitely something worthwhile. And I think that's easily the thing that's what we're hoping to champion. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you in that my biggest issue with Searching was that I was really with it for the like first 2/3 of it, but then the third act ultimately left me a little bit wanting as far as like, it feels like the director here, like he knows how to set up a really solid premise. He has an idea as far as like executing it really well and very clever. But then like when it comes time to actually wrap it up and put it into a like nice little bow, it always ends up being a little bit lacking. At least from his first two films. I definitely got that sense from that film. And then I ultimately, to a lesser extent, felt that way with this film because like you were alluding to, it felt like it was setting itself up for be like a really solid genre low film, contained in the house, having our two lead actors bounce off each other in really compelling and unique ways. Then without getting too far into the spoiler territory, it does kind of seem like it wraps up in a fairly, I guess convoluted to borderline problematic sort of way, which unfortunately hinders the experience overall. But like you were saying, I definitely appreciate the first 2/3 a lot. That I think this is an easy film to champion, especially on Hulu.
Yeah, I would agree. It feels weird that there have been so many movies that were going to get theatrical releases this year and then came out on streaming. To say that so many of them I feel like work better on streaming, but I feel like this does, honestly. I'm not sure if the format like allows you to overlook some of the stuff that doesn't always quite work, especially toward the end. Like there's some revelation of information that just like in a logistical sense does not work. But I feel like I'm willing to overlook it because the rest of it is so tight, and I'm fairly pleased that something that is that otherwise tight and interesting in terms of perspective is something that you can find on a streaming service like Hulu. It's widely available. It's entertaining. It's for what it is. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, and I realized we were talking, the movie I was actually thinking of was the show The Act, which is also a Hulu exclusive, which has a somewhat similar plot to this film. And I think one of the advantages to having this be on Hulu and on streaming is that this might have a bigger audience than it would have in theaters, because I don't know if people would have been inclined to see this in theaters, but definitely watching on streaming, especially now, makes it pretty accessible. And I hope hopefully a film that can reach a wide audience and do a lot of good. So we can get into our final thoughts from there. Abby, what did you think overall of the film, and what grade would you give it?
Overall, I thought it was, I think it's probably a pretty solid B from me. I think there are some script elements that don't quite work. The ultimate kind of twist of it isn't that hard to guess, but I think the concept behind it is pretty fresh. I think Kiera Allen is great. Sarah Paulson puts in a pretty solid performance as well. Kind of drawing on her American Horror Story chops, I think, to create a character that is both horrific and also very restrained. So there's a lot that I like about it. There's some stuff that could be better, but I think overall that doesn't diminish the fact that it's an enjoyable movie to watch and has some interesting thoughts going on in there. So yeah, a B from me.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to all the people you just celebrated, I also want to point out the editing, I thought, from Nick Johnson and Will Merrick was really solid. And I think it helps to give the film a lot of really tight, strong pacing throughout, which keeps your investment throughout, even when it starts to get a little bit silly, at least for my interest. But for me, yeah, I'm right there with you. My only real complaints are that I kind of wish by the second half, or at least the third act, it was a little bit more willing to indulge in the campy aspects that I think were starting to become apparent. And I think maybe if he was a little bit more willing to indulge that side of the film, that would have made some of the more sillier aspects of the third act maybe stick the landing a little bit more. And maybe that would have helped it kind of find its rhythm in that last 20 or 30 minutes. But overall, yeah, like you said, I think this is a really great showcase for Kiera Allen. And also it's a solid studio effort from Aneesh Chaganty. So, I mean, I think for everyone involved, this is a, small scale, but easily a win for the filmmaker and the lead actors. And, definitely, I think, we see a lot of filmmakers who they make a really solid independent film and then they jump into a like major blockbuster like Jurassic World or like a Marvel movie or something. And I really appreciate that. This is a bigger film, a studio effort from the director, but it's also a pretty small scale. And it seems like a fairly economical film to jump into as far as a follow-up to that. So I'm really curious to follow his career from this point forward and see what he does next, because like I was saying before, I think this is basically as good, if not better, than Searching. I know John will disagree with that, but I definitely was impressed by it, and I'm curious to see where one goes from here. So yeah, that was Run, and that's on Hulu now.
Think of a favorite show. Have you ever wondered what the writers were thinking? Or how you might have done things differently? Welcome to Right or Wrong.
Got him, Rory. Get your mom.
It's chaos. Rory dives out of the way as Chalmers lunges towards Marky and Tasia and begins firing. Most of the crew runs out of the house in all directions, having not signed up.
I mean, I've got my own thoughts on where I think you should go, but just by the writing.
I do think that a supernatural aspect would be beneficial, given what has been set up, right? Tonally, structurally, all that. However, I'm not sure.
Back at Rivertone's headquarters after a successful gig.
So I say to this knucklehead, look.
Don't get all riled up, Creamy.
Oh, okay, very funny.
You've related this account to us on several prior occasions.
Just the way it's told, it felt like a comic book. Like I could see the stills of each character in some kind of pose. They had their own music. They had their own theme.
Very much what I was going for.
It's so
only
clear.
one way to find out. Join us, brave listeners, in our writer's room. Welcome to Right or Wrong.
So this is kind of weird because this is technically part of a mini series on Amazon Prime called Small Axe, which is from director Steve McQueen, who is obviously the Best Picture winning filmmaker behind 12 Years a Slave, as well as Hunger, and most recently Widows, and also before that he made Shame with both those, that and Hunger with Michael Fassbender. But yeah, so this is a mini series, but each installment of it is basically feature length, if not basically like this one that we're going to talk about, Mangrove, basically a 2.5, or not 2.5, but like 130-minute long film. So we're kind of getting this weird phase right now with, like, you know, we're having conversations about like Twin Peaks season 3. Is that a show or a movie? Or what are some other examples of this? I guess with the Queen's Gambit, you know, that's another one where people are, is this a film or is this a show, like a mini series? And so I'm sure some people are going to argue this is technically an episode, not a movie, but I don't know where you stand on that, Abby, before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of the movie episode itself.
Yeah, I think Steve McQueen has been on record in some interviews as saying that he sees it as a series of 5 films. So like you could maybe bring it a little bit closer in terms of format to like the Decalogue or the Three Colors trilogy, where it's like something that is like all of the individual elements are parts of a whole, but they are also their own films that stand apart by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great comparison, too, because I think, yeah, that puts it in a little bit easier perspective as far as just examining how to look at these things. Because I know, like, when people are going to be looking at this, like, say, for the end of year best ofs, like, some people are going to say it's a show, like, examining Small Axe, the whole thing. Or some people are going to probably take individual episodes or films from this, like Mangroves or next week's Lovers Rock, and examine them as movies. But for the sake of our argument, we'll just say this is a movie because I think it is, because it's obviously telling a historical account of the Mangrove 9, which I don't know, was this a story you were familiar with going into this?
It was not. This was all new to me. And in general, I have very little knowledge of kind of the history of racial relations in the UK. So the Small Axe as a whole, the series, I think, is going to be really enlightening for me. Oh, for sure. Yeah. But I'm in a similar camp. Like, I didn't know the story going in, but I didn't want to speak for you as far as if you knew this. But this is based on a story that happened in Notting Hill in West London, where a group of Black activists were tried for inciting a riot in 1970. And the film, as far as the first half, is establishing the Mangrove establishment, or the Mangrove restaurant, excuse me, that was basically the center of the argument, or the battle between the restaurant owners and the police, or I guess as they're called here, the poli. And then the second half of this film is examining the actual like 50 plus day that they were on trial, and all the different incidents and inciting issues that ensue from there. But I guess the main thing that took me aback as far as the presentation of this is that it's a little bit more, I guess, straightforward or conventional than your average Steve McQueen film. I don't know if you felt that way going into this or not, but it felt like it was a little bit more like kind of like your traditional biopic with Steve McQueen type flourishes throughout, which I felt was definitely very interesting. How did you feel about that? Yeah, I would agree that I was kind of surprised throughout, like I kept looking for things that felt more kind of typically Steve McQueen. There were a couple of shots that I thought stood out as things that were like hallmarks of his, where he's like kind of looking at just sort of disruptive impact in specific scenes. And like there's one particular where the kitchen of the Mangrove restaurant is raided by the cops, and you see like the people are like dragged out of the kitchen, and like somebody drops a colander and he like holds on a shot of the colander like falling to the ground, wobbling, kind of stabilizing, and like he holds it for a very long time. Which was, it reminded me of certain elements of like 12 Years a Slave and certain parts of Hunger as well, which is, I think that's the thing that he does really well. There weren't a whole lot of other flourishes that struck me as distinctly his own. But actually, I think it's interesting that we're getting both this and the Trial of the Chicago 7 in the same year, because I think they make very interesting like double features back to back. This one's pretty long. I think Chicago 7 is too, but it's.
Yeah,
I don't know that I would. Oh, are they? Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I don't know that I would recommend watching them like right back to back, because that might be a little bit too much in terms of time commitment. But in terms of content, I think it would be interesting to like compare and contrast those. I think that's something that you will probably get a lot of as we sort of wrap up the year, because I like Mangrove. I feel like the Chicago 7 film, Aaron Sorkin's film, is, I mean, obviously much more like his own kind of a thing, where it's like zippy and there's a lot of momentum in the courtroom scenes. I feel like McQueen's film is a little less interested in that, and given its length, there were parts of it, especially around the middle, that kind of dragged for me in the trial element. But I think other than that, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, to go off your earlier point, I definitely noticed, I mean, even though, like you said, it's a fairly conventional, or at least what I said, a fairly conventional effort from Steve McQueen, I did notice there's a couple more things that felt like him. For instance, there's a scene where our lead character, Frank, played by Sean Parkes, is like kind of held in a holding cell. And it's like this really long shot where we see him like kind of bang against the door and then going against the wall and like bang against the door. And it's kind of shot in this like angelic way, because like the window is like shown throughout as he's doing this, and it felt very much like something reminiscent of, like you said, Hunger or some of his earlier films. So I definitely think throughout the film, and there's also like a shot where we see like the top of a police car as it's going to the Mangrove, and it kind of just follows it through the neighborhood. That felt pretty reminiscent of that tracking shot that we saw in Widows with Colin Farrell. But yeah, like you said, like it definitely feels like the broad stroke of it was something that Steve McQueen wanted to do in a kind of more traditional or expected fashion, because I think, like you're saying, the timeliness or the relevance of the story remains so impacting and so true to now that I think he just wanted the realism of it to be very apparent and very hard hitting. And I think by and large he is successful. I think this is a really well made, really compelling, and very emotionally gripping story that definitely is benefited by his direction and his presentation. But I do agree that I think because there is that sense of conventionality throughout, that it doesn't quite feel like it reaches the heights of his other works. But that's not to say that it's bad. I just think that because he's a director of such outstanding work, that anything that just feels like maybe a little bit more conventional from him just doesn't feel like it hits quite as hard, at least for me. But I mean, I think definitely the elements here that really work are the cast, which also features Lytha Wright, who people probably best know from Black Panther. And she's, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I thought she was fantastic in this, and easily one of her best performances to date.
Yeah, I like Letitia Wright a lot. I think Sean Parks is also really good throughout. Absolutely. He's as Frank. I really did like that scene that you mentioned before with him in the holding cell. I think it's really compelling, and he has a really interesting arc throughout too. But yeah, I like her. I like Sean Parks. I like Letitia Wright. I think I'm gonna have to look this up. But the actress playing Barbara Beese, I had not seen in much before either, but I really liked her.
She's great.
She gave a very full-bodied performance in that as well.
Yeah, I kind of wish she was in it a little bit more, because she, she gets definitely moments to shine throughout, and I was really intrigued by her character and the way that she was presented in the film. But yeah, I mean, I think and it's a weird, like I said, it's kind of a weird film, because like you have to examine it as part of a full miniseries, which we can't do yet because we can only get one installment at a time. So I'm not quite sure how this compares to the other 4 installments that we'll see in Small Axe. But certainly if you just want to watch this as an individual film, I do think it works. I think it's really compelling. And I also think it puts even though I liked Trial of Chicago 7 a decent bit, I think it ultimately puts it to shame just from a directorial standpoint, because it's so clear that like Aaron Sorkin is a writer who is just directing his material. Steve McQueen is a director, and you really see his flourishes throughout. Even if it's not as apparent as some of his other works, it's clear that even its conventionality, it does really shine a lot. So for me, at least, this is a B+. Would you give it, Abby?
Yeah, I think I'd give it a B+ as well. I agree that I think McQueen is definitely like when you use the term auteur, I think in Sorkin's case, I think that can be kind of detrimental because some of his hangups end up being kind of annoying after a while. McQueen's, I feel like, are always really stylistic and really interesting. And this definitely feels like something that is, I mean, also because he helped to write it, I think it feels very personal and significant to him. Yeah, I think it's the length did end up getting to me. I think it could have used a little more kind of consistent forward momentum, but also I feel like that's not necessarily Steve McQueen's stock in trade. So I think he made the movie that he wanted to make, and I think it's pretty good. So yeah, I'd give it a B+.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should mention that in addition to this installment, both Lover's Rock, which is the one that comes up afterwards, and Red, White, and Blue with John Boyega were premiered as part of the New York Film Festival, or whatever the New York Film Festival technically was this year, because I believe it was almost all virtual with the exception of drive-in screens throughout New York. But yeah, I mean, it seems like of the three, this one got really strong reviews, but it seems like Lover's Rock is the one that people were really taken by of the three that got premiered early. So I'm really excited to see that. I imagine you are as well.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard really good things about Lover's Rock, and I'm excited to watch that one.
Yeah, and I've heard good things about Red, White, and Blue as well. But it seems like of the three, that one's the one that's gained the most acclaim and notice. I think because that one premiered first as well. But which is weird because I guess it's premiering second for most people, but for the New York Film Festival, it premiered first. But nevertheless, that is Mangrove as part of Small Axe. That's available right now on Amazon Prime as well as on the BBC. Who I think they're premiering I think a week earlier than us, because I believe earlier today, if you are watching through the BBC, you can actually see Lover's Rock, but we won't have access to it until Friday. So yeah, enjoy that luxury because you'll get things a little bit earlier over there. But in any case, if you're no matter where you are, you can see Mangrove now on Amazon or the BBC. But yeah, so to follow that up, I saw another period court drama piece. This one is certainly quite different in that it's not quite as visually dynamic or made by an esteemed director, but it's called The Last Vermeer, which is the new film from David Friedkin with a screenplay from John Orloff, and it stars primarily Guy Pearce as Han von Meergen, and then also has Clarice Bang, which he's an actor I recognize primarily from The Square, but I know he's, I think, a little bit more famous for his roles, his Danish roles, as far as his English language work. But this also stars Vicky Krieps, who I believe you all will probably know from Phantom Thread, and she's great in that film. And I think this is the first thing I've seen her in since then. I don't know, is there anything besides this that you can think of, Abby, that's come out with her since Phantom Thread?
No, I think Phantom Thread is the only thing that I had known her from. I know this initially premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival last year, and so it kind of, in terms of career momentum, it felt like a natural next step for her. But now at this point, it feels a little bit delayed, which is a bummer because I like her a lot. So I'm excited to see that this is finally getting a release.
Nice, yeah. I believe this also was at the Telluride Film Festival, which premiered around the same time. But yeah, I mean, at least for me, this is the first thing I've seen her in, and I think she was also in what was it called? The Girl with the Spider, it's the Girl in the Spider's Web, the third installment, and the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy that came out, or actually the second installment, because we never got the follow up from David Fincher. But yeah, so this film, it's another, like I said, another historical telling. This one is primarily focused on the artist, like I said, Han van Meegeren, who is famous for being a forger who basically swindled millions of dollars from the Nazis by forging Johannes Vermeer's paintings and claiming that they were original works of art from him. Alas, that wasn't really the case, but according to the people, according to the government, they thought otherwise because it was so convincing. But through Claudius Bang's perspective as Captain Joseph Pillar, we learn that that's not really the case. And because that is the case, his life's on the line through this trial. But for the second half of it, like I said, we follow that trial and we see him fighting for his life in order to prove his innocence, or at least his mastery as far as being an expert forger. But as I was telling Abby off the air, it seems like the type of film that I think the more interesting stuff starts to come out in the second half of the film, because that's where we actually get the trial. That's more where we get like the kind of interesting revelations that start to come out later on, and we get a little bit more perspective as far as who the people are and how they're influencing the trial. The first half is a lot of setup, which is fine, but just feels very perfunctory. The filmmaking, by and large, is just sort of serviceable, with the exception of Guy Pearce's performance, who really brings a lot of life in this and is clearly having a lot of fun playing this historical figure. But the execution of it, even from some of our established actors, is just kind of ho-hum throughout until we kind of get into the later half, which is a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more layered in its presentation. Which, as far as establishing the film, later half is definitely beneficial as far as keeping your interest, but ultimately it just leaves you wanting more from that and less of what we got during the first hour of the film, which is a shame because, like I said, I think once it finds its rhythm, it is an interesting film, but I think it's a little bit too little too late by that point. But in the end, I'd say it's like a fine low C+. Like I don't think it's one, because it's only available in theaters right now, that you should be rushing out to see, even if it was particularly good. But when it's on VOD, if you want to check it out, maybe it's a very nice grandma type movie in that it's very kind of even paced, and it has a couple like violent moments and a few moments of sharp language, but for the most part, it's a pretty digestible film that you can enjoy fairly easily with your extended relatives if you happen to see them anytime soon. But yeah, in any case, it wasn't one that was really on my radar, and it wasn't one that super impressed me by the end. But if it is of interest, it's worth checking out on VOD. Like I said, Abby, is this one that was on your radar?
It was. I was kind of curious about it. It's so when I was at Toronto last year, this and another Claes Bang movie about art called the Burnt Orange Heresy premiered around the same time, and I kept getting the two of them confused because they both starred him and they had an interesting cast. But it sounds like of the two, because they both came out like this year on demand, that the Burnt Orange Heresy might be the one worth checking out of the two of them. But like, I also have a space in my heart for masterpiece theater style grandma movies. So who knows? This may end up making an appearance at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to describe it, because it definitely feels like the type of film that if you take out some of the more R-rated stuff, it would fit perfectly on PBS. And, that's not a dismiss of, or that's not a backhanded compliment or anything of PBS. That just means that it seems like something they'd appreciate, or something that would air on their station with no real problems. But yeah, I haven't seen Burnt Orange Heresy, but I know that one's a little bit more, I guess, like risque, or at least something that has a little bit more of a like willingness to indulge in its R rating. In this film is like basically just a pumped up PG-13 film. So I feel like that one's probably a little bit more fun as far as what you'll get. But like I said, not really my thing, but it'll probably have an audience. But I'm more curious to hear what you think of our next film, which is Collective, which is a film I've been hearing a little about this weekend, but I don't know too much otherwise. Could you fill us in on what that is?
Absolutely. So Collective is a documentary by Alexander Nanau. These are all Romanian names, so I'm probably going to butcher most of them. But he's a Romanian documentarian, and it is a film about the kind of long-term social fallout from a 2015 nightclub fire that happened in Bucharest, Romania. The name of the club is also Collective, so that's kind of where the name of the film comes from, though it's also thematically relevant. So there's a giant fire at this nightclub that leaves like over 130 people seriously injured and 27 people dead. And the thing that continues to like kind of make this into a giant horror story is the way that the injured folks are treated in hospitals after the event. Like, people continue to die at an alarming rate. And I think somebody at one point says that the ICU rate is like about 90%, which is insane. So it's pretty bad, and that leads to government upheaval. The the sitting government is replaced with a technocratic government that is there until an election, which will decide basically if they did their job and fixed things or if things need to continue changing. So Alexander Nanau follows kind of two major threads throughout all of this. One half is a investigative journalist team. It's a bunch of writers who work for a sports daily. So like they're not necessarily hard news journalists. That's not their beat. But they have taken this on as sort of their thing. And they are led by a man named Catalin Tolentan. And they're doing all of this research and finding out really shocking information about why the death rates in their hospitals are so high. And it turns out to do with the disinfecting procedures. The disinfectant that the hospitals are using is just like massively diluted, and it all comes from one company that's run by this biotech magnate who's just about as corrupt as you can possibly be as a human being. And the other half is the newly installed Minister of Health, whose name is Vlad Voiculescu. And he takes over from a fairly corrupt predecessor. He's a former patient rights advocate. And his part of the film is basically just discovering the administrative depths to which the corruption runs in terms of how hospitals are run in the country and how people get appointed to like hospital administrator positions, and his attempts to just basically gut the whole thing from the inside out so that he can kind of start with raw materials and make it more fair and better, and in the meantime allow people to transfer abroad, like to go to Vienna for major hospital like operations or like burn unit stuff, just so that they can get adequate care. And he faces a lot of kind of nationalist fallout from that. There's like a ton of negative feedback. So it basically, there's a lot that's really sad and dark about this movie. There's a lot that's really gross too. Like later, I think a video resurfaces of the way that a patient is being treated in the hospital that is truly upsetting. But the way in which it's handled is just, it's fascinating. It feels like you're watching a season of The Wire, basically, the way that it's filmed and the way that the characters are portrayed. Like, nobody's pretty, everybody's tired. It's all extremely real. And the story, it's, when you hear that a movie like Dark Waters from last year, or like Erin Brockovich, when you hear that it's like based on a true story, you kind of think of like, oh yeah, that's awful, but you don't think of it as like a thing that actually happened, because more often than not, the story that happened is kind of outside of your knowledge of everyday life. And this is like a documentary that feels like one of those movies, except that you're like absolutely acutely aware of how real it is and how bad the system is. I really can't say enough good about it. It's such an interesting movie. It's infuriating, but it's also fascinating. I think Vlad Voiculescu as a character is just like, it's amazing that a person like him exists, because he's got like a job that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, like running an extremely corrupt and trying to fix an extremely corrupt healthcare system. I mean, take from that what you will, but just especially the way the thing that he's put in charge of and the level of corruption that he has to deal with, and the way that it on a daily basis is impacting the lives of people who are dying. But he's like exactly the person that you want in that job. Like, he is so driven and so like actually considerate and thoughtful and really wants to do the right thing, that like it's kind of inspiring to be reminded that people like that actually do exist in real life. So there is even kind of a hopeful element to it, even though I think the film as a whole is still pretty dark and sad. It's I think in today's climate, and this particular climate, when we're dealing with a pandemic situation and like deep political divisions, there's a lot that parallels with Collective pretty directly in a way that might make it kind of a harder sell than normal, especially during holiday times. But just as like a piece of journalistic like documentation, it's just so impeccably done, and the momentum is really, really good. And Nanau comes across these like characters who are compelling, but also just so relatable in every day that it's very easy to identify with them and want to cheer them on. So yeah, that's Collective for me. I would give it an A, like high A+. It's like one of my favorites of the year.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at Rotten Tomatoes right now, and it has 100%. And it seems like a lot of critics are in agreement with you as far as claiming this is not only a masterpiece, but one of the best films of the year, including your review I just saw is here from the Crooked Marquee. So definitely check that out as well. But yeah, I mean, I definitely love journalistic documentaries like this that really just tell you the nitty gritty in a true and unflinching fashion. And this definitely sounds like that type of film. So I'm very curious to check this out. And how did you see it?
I saw this initially at the True False Film Festival, but it's out now. I think limited release in some theaters, but it's also on video on demand. So like I think a lot of theaters are carrying it through their rent online system. So if you want to support your favorite local art house, you can do so by watching it through them, which is another great reason to watch this movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely on my radar as of now. So thank you for the recommend. Yeah, and so briefly forgot for a moment I'm still hosting. Sorry about that.
We're going from that to a pretty lighthearted coda here. So why don't you tell me about the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely in the same vein. Definitely a very gritty, raw, unflinching look at the Star Wars franchise. No, this is just a Disney Plus special that was released on Friday. Basically, just an effort to kind of expand, I guess, this like new Lego division of the ever-growing Star Wars franchise from Disney's perspective. I mean, this was just one I checked out because it's pretty short. It's only like 40-something minutes long. And I was initially going to cover it as an off-topic, but since we're kind of late on feature reviews this week, I figured I'd just talk about it real brief at the end here. So, I mean, this is definitely, as the title would suggest, a kind of knock on the infamous regular Star Wars holiday special, which I don't know. Have you seen that, Abby?
I would say that I regret to say that I have, but I don't regret to say that I have. I love the original Star Wars holiday special, as goofy and awful as it is.
You know, I'm really happy to hear it because that's like, I can't defend the original Star Wars holiday special, but I've seen it twice, once sober, once not. And my takeaway, at least from the first viewing, is that for everything that's wrong with it, it's definitely the type of thing that I'll never really forget because it's such a like Coke-fueled look at the Star Wars franchise before it was even really a franchise. It was just something that George Lucas came up with and like no one really had expectations for it. And then all of a sudden it's like the biggest movie in the world and some studios like, well, you got to make a holiday special because that's the thing we do now. And it just came out very ill-conceived and very weird and random, but just filled with all these absurd decisions and creative ideas that I think definitely make it very interesting as far as its inclusion in the ever-growing franchise. Like I said, for instance, to this date, it's the only Star Wars film that is a musical, which I think definitely puts it above Attack of the Clones. But it's also filled with like random animation segments. There's like several musical beats as far as like just like random like Jefferson Starship numbers and like interpretive dance and a like weird Cheers sitcom where B. Arthur is at a cantina and she's like serving drinks to people like through their head, and it's just like, who made this idea? Like where?
Let's not forget the Harvey Korman cooking segment with his whip 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 stir.
Yeah, he's like playing on I guess Julia Child or something in that vein. But so in any case, my point is that is a special that whether you like it or not, it sounds like most people don't for a lot of obvious reasons. I think it's going to be in my memory for a long time in a way that the Lego Star Wars holiday special I'm probably going to forget about by this Christmas. And that's not to say it's bad. It's fine. It's like, it's very cute as far as what it's trying to do. It definitely, it's less a like redo of that holiday special than it is a basically kind of like a send off on the kind of like time hopping films of other franchises where it's like characters are going through different timelines and like they're kind of like bringing, it has kind of more of a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure kind of vibe where it's just like bringing all these different Star Wars characters from different points in the timeline into one kind of weird collective mishmash of absurd events. But for the most part, it's just an excuse to have a lot of like callback jokes and like kind of silly self-referential humor, which I mean, I'm kind of hit or miss on that type of stuff. Like sometimes I think it's really charming and fun. Other times I think it's kind of cloying and annoying. And I guess I'm somewhere in between with this. Like some of the jokes are kind of fun and silly in a fairly inspired way. There's a lot of callbacks to, for instance, like Adam Driver's shirtless appearance in The Last Jedi. They get a lot of mileage out of that whole thing, and then like just general things throughout the franchise I won't give away, but it's also just a very like odd inclusion for a number of reasons. Like for instance, there's a whole bit where like Lego Yoda goes on a rant about like participation trophies, and it's like played as a joke, but it's like seems like something the writers were serious about, and so it's just like sit down for a minute and hear what Yoda has to say about your participation trophies, kids. Which I don't know. I mean, I kind of admire it for doing that, because that's more in the spirit of Lego or the original Star Wars Holiday Special than doing some kind of more corporate thing, which is what this ultimately is. But in the end, it is what it is. I don't think it's going to be for most people. Like, I think it's just going to be for primarily young kids who like Star Wars and just want to be with these characters, even in Lego form. And that's fine. I will say Kelly Rose Train is in this more than she is in Rise of Skywalker, which is an odd distinction, but nevertheless, I guess that just goes to show how much she was tragically not in the last installment of the actual Star Wars movie. And, again, shame for that. But yeah, other than that, I don't know if I really want to give it a grade because it's like a special. So I don't know if it's like a movie per se, but if I were to give it a grade, I'd say it's like a fine C+. Like it's nice. It means well. I don't think anyone's going to be like mad that they saw this, but I don't think there's really anything here that, unless you're like a hardcore fan or you have young children, you're really going to get much out of. All I'll say other than that is, I don't know who designed Lego Oscar Isaac, but he should sue because he looks absolutely nothing like Poe, to the point where I was like, throughout the special, I was like, who's this character they keep introducing? Like they keep playing him off as kind of like this goofy character. And I'm like, okay, like, I guess he's like a new character they're going to introduce later on. And it took me about halfway through to be like, oh wait, that's supposed to be Poe. Yeah, I don't know who designed that, but for shame.
That's that's kind of a bummer. I'm glad that Kelly Marie Tran gets more to do in this though, and also that they kept her on for like the voice talent for this, because it looks like that's not necessarily the case for everybody else. But yeah, she deserves more good things. Kelly Marie Tran does, so good for her.
Absolutely, yeah. And it seems like that's why I also feel really bummed about her being out of Rise of Skywalker, is that she seems to really genuinely love the franchise in a way that a lot of the other established actors seem to be kind of over it for understandable reasons. But at the same time, like I feel like she deserves a lot better than what she's been given. But my only other tisk for this is that there's basically next to no Lumpy in this, which I think for being a Star Wars holiday special is for shame, because Lumpy is the heart of the original Star Wars holiday special and the main character.
Justice for Lumpy.
Yeah, justice for Lumpy for sure. And he's like, I don't even think he gets a line. Well, I think he gets like one growl, but like, he is the heart of the Star Wars holiday special, the original one, and you can't throw him in the corner on my watch. So yeah, that's my kind of rambling thoughts on the Star Wars holiday special. In addition to the other names we mentioned, there is also Anthony Daniels and Billy D. Williams reprising their roles from Star Wars, mostly in cameo fashion, but they're there. But other than that, it's on Disney Plus if you want to check it out during the holidays. Like I said, it just kind of depends on how you feel about Star Wars at this point. For me, I'm kind of over it, so I guess I wasn't really the key audience for this, but if you like it, I'm sure you'll get a lot of mileage out of it. Are you planning to check this one out, Abby? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't know. I might. I thought about it a little bit. If there's any particular thing, moment where I'm feeling like I'm in the need of some holiday cheer and pick me up. But honestly, it sounds like I might get a little bit more mileage out of going on YouTube and watching the OG really, really bad Star Wars holiday special again. So I might just do that instead. Yeah,
I would say definitely like get some eggnog and have some friends on Zoom and watch the original over watching this Lego version, because I think that'd be more fun to riff on than watching this, which is, like I said, fairly self-aware, and therefore it's not like something you can really pick apart or really like joke about in like the same way you can enjoy the original holiday special. But like I said, it's self-aware enough that I think it's not trying to be more than what it is, and so yeah, that's basically what it is. But that's our show. Very rambling and less organized fashion. But Abby, we made it through.
We did. I thought you did a pretty good job. I think John would be proud.
We'll see. I'm sure I'll get some notes, but we'll figure it out. But
there'll be future arguments that I'll have to disentangle in skits from here on out for the rest of the year, I think.
Basically, yeah. But yeah. So if you want to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and Stitcher, we'd really appreciate that. We always love hearing from our fans, and hopefully it's positive reviews. I mean, if you feel somewhat inclined to write negatively, I guess I can't stop you, but do what you must. You can also hang out with us on Facebook and Facebook and Twitter. And you can also email us at cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. Whew. All right. That's our show. From the internet, Pennsylvania, I'm Lashin.
From the internet, Kansas City, I'm Abby Olchesi.
All right. See you, everybody.